Every now and again, I'll make a video that's just sort of a general recommendation of something, be it a movie, a series, or a video game. The last time I did this was with Wandersong, a great indie game which I wanted to share. By that same token, I recently watched an animated movie that completely blew me away and which I've been dying to talk about. So Cartoon Saloon is a small Irish animation studio based in Kilkenny. The studio was formed in 1999 by these three mega talents, Paul Young, Tomm Moore, and Nora Twomey. They released their first feature film in 2010, The Secret of Kells, and have since produced 3 more fantastic feature films. Typically focusing on Irish folklore, the studio makes unique movies on unique subject matter, and I'm pretty comfortable calling all of their films masterpieces in their own right. Moreover, they're one of the few Western studios today who still make 2D hand-drawn animated films. And while I understand why 3D CG animation is the new norm, I still think traditional 2D animation has a unique charm that needs to be kept alive. Cartoon Saloon are worth their weight in gold where that's concerned. I mean, seriously, you don't need me to tell you this looks amazing. They could easily spar with the greats of Ghibli. In 2020, they released their most recent feature film, Wolfwalkers, and I watched it and it was incredible and no one is talking about it. Why is no one talking about this movie? In either case, that's what I want to discuss today, because I love this studio, I love Wolfwalkers, and I think Cartoon Saloon stands out in a contemporary media climate that is as shallow as it currently is. Smaller studios are consistently drowned out by bloated media conglomerates. And if we're being real here, a lot of that has to do with Disney. Since acquiring some of the most valuable and popular IPs on the planet, I think it's safe to say Disney has a bit of a monopoly over cinema. This applies even more so to Western animated films. Disney has very little competition from other large studios, which is understandable. DreamWorks and Illumination Entertainment have a questionable track record, and there is at least a certain threshold of quality to be expected from Disney. Hell, accounting for its subsidiaries, just look how many times a non-Disney film won Best Animated Feature in the last 20 years. Yeah, that's not a lot. And yes, the Oscars are hardly a concrete measurement of quality, but they're worth a lot of cultural capital. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Disney movies. Their animated films tend to be formulaic at their worst and are generally a bit saccharine for my tastes. And I know Encanto has set the world on fire, but it didn't blow me away like I thought it would. Luisa can hang though. Plus, Disney's ethical shortcomings are hard to look past. I also think Pixar has been on a bit of a downward slope since Up, with few exceptions. And if you disagree, that's totally fine, great even. But regardless of my opinion, don't you think it's a bit of a shame that there isn't more of a breadth of artistic voices that can stand a chance against a conglomerate like Disney? I mean, this is a picture of 2021's 15 most streamed films that I found while making this video. Count how many of them are Disney. Then count how many of them are animated and how many of those animated films are Disney or Disney subsidiaries. Then try to fight the urge to shit yourself to death. But with all that said and done, Cartoon Saloon are totally worth their salt. Regardless of whether they'll ever stand a chance against Disney, their movies will always be a cut above. This is Curmudgeon Media, my name's Tom, and I'm going to tell you about Wolfwalkers. Before we get our claws into Wolfwalkers, I'd like to quickly cover Cartoon Saloon's first 2 Irish folklore movies, because there's a clear sense of how the studio has learned and grown from one film to the next. I won't be covering The Breadwinner, since it's not relevant to the Irish folklore trilogy, but that's also an incredible film, and y'all should totally see it. If you want to skip this and jump right to the business, here's a time code, go ham. After 4 years in development limbo, The Secret of Kells entered production in 2005 and is a beautiful visual piece and a fascinating indication of what the studio would become. Right off the bat, they solidified their flat storybook style, and it immediately gives the film this rustic and inimitable appearance. It's more of an audio-visual feast with spiritual overtones than a narrative work in my opinion. Nevertheless, the film follows the story of a boy being apprenticed in calligraphy and trying to complete the gospel book which would come to be known as the Book of Kells. The story takes place in the 8th century during the Viking conquest of Ireland, and its central theme is to do with the importance of art, and how that art can carry the torch of an entire culture, despite those who may tragically fall to the axe of colonisers. It feels unfair to call Kells' blemishes issues. Many of them are budget related, such as the occasional limited animation or certain cut corners for time and money, like keeping people's mouths off screen during dialogue. The spiritual nature of the film means it can carry the themes and atmosphere without a heavy plot, but what little narrative there is, it's a little obscure at times and not necessarily communicated in the best way. But these are tiny criticisms. It's a gorgeous, unique film, aesthetically captivating and with an incredible original score that left people excited for what the studio might put out next. Song of the Sea is a step up from Kells in every imaginable way. The story is more coherent, the visuals are crisper and more polished, and the emotional beats more hard-hitting. It centres upon Ben, a child whose mother died giving birth to his younger sister Saoirse, who, like their mother, is a Selkie, mythical beings who can transform into seals and can cast spells through the medium of song. Ben and Saoirse end up on a little adventure to free the spirits of Ireland from the clutches of a witch using Saoirse's Selkie powers. Where Song of the Sea differs the most from Kells is the nature of its plot. While Kells uses its Irish folklore to craft an esoteric experience with focus on the audio visuals, Song of the Sea instead uses its folklore as the backdrop to a deeply personal story. It is, to me, a meditation on grief with strong ecological overtones and a real tearjerker in places. Any of the blemishes Kells suffered in assimilating its 2D style with the more contemporary animation techniques have been totally ironed out, resulting in pretty spotless visuals. While the plot is more coherent than Kells by design, a few key details are still brushed over in some choppy exposition at the beginning of the film, which hinders the strength of the story, but only a little. The motivations and feelings of the characters are always at the forefront, and are always communicated excellently. Nevertheless, both Kells and Song of the Sea struggle a bit with the details of their folklore. The latter suffers from this most of all, where a little less vagueness would have helped, but it's not a deal breaker by any means. Once again, the studio put out a fantastic film and proved that they were growing artistically. By the time we get to Wolfwalkers, it really feels like the culmination of everything the studio has learned over the last 3 Irish folklore films, and a perfect conclusion to the trilogy. Wolfwalkers takes any of the blemishes with the previous installments and tightens them up, resulting in not only their finest film to date, but truly one of the finest animated films of all time. To put it simply, Wolfwalkers is about Irish werewolves in 17th century Ireland. Set in Kilkenny in the year 1650, the story follows Robin, an English girl who recently immigrated to Ireland with her father, Bill. Bill has been brought into Kilkenny as a hunter, with orders from this asshole to cull the forest's wolf population so they can chop down the trees and expand. Robin ends up stumbling into one of the forest's inhabitants, Maeve, who is a wolfwalker, human while she's awake, wolf while she's asleep, and general enemy of the townsfolk. The two of them end up embroiled in the conflict between the English colonials and the indigenous forest dwellers. Conflict and drama ensues, you get the picture. Any of the story vagueness of Kells and Song of the Sea isn't present here. The very opening scene of the film does an excellent job of setting up the fantasy and central conflict of the movie. With a few swings of an axe, we can see the expansion taking place, before the woodsmen are beset upon by the Wolfwalkers attempting to protect their land. But despite the woodsman's fear, Maeve and her mother heal his wounds and send him on his way. We then get this great shot. The domineering city hangs over the top left of the frame, rigid and square and bleak, with the Wolfwalkers below, framed by the soft, bright curves of the foliage. It immediately positions them as defenders, not attackers, and the English colonised city as a hard-edged, stifling imperial force. The town soldiers come rushing out in full force, and the Wolfwalkers retreat into the forest, an ominous bounty poster hanging over frame left. £5 for a dead wolf. Unwelcome in their own home. This intro very efficiently communicates key details for the setup of the story. Number 1, the colonisers and the townsfolk are the perpetrators, and the wolves are simply defending what's theirs. Number 2, the war against the indigenous folk is more than just physical. It's clear that negative ideas about who the forest dwellers are have been propagated, and that these ideas aren't the reality. Number 3, the relationship between man and nature is a thematic core to the story, and number 4, the Wolfwalkers have magic, including a healing spell, which comes into play later on multiple times as a crucial aspect of the plot. The drama is very high stakes, especially for a kids movie, but it's funneled through a select handful of characters who are fun, likeable, interesting and easy to empathise with. The two leads, Robin and Maeve, come from opposite sides of the conflict. Robin very much begins the story as the arrogant, overconfident sort. She's crafty, smart, adventurous, and fun, but she's clearly out of her depth, blind to her surroundings, and totally buys into the hate campaign against the wolves. But she pretty quickly does an about-face when she and Maeve are introduced. The pre-established biases fall away, and they become fast friends.
Smell you later, Tony. Not if I smell you first.
Where we really sympathise with Robin is in how she's clearly stifled by the social standards placed upon her. She's introduced to us nailing shots with her crossbow instead of doing her chores like she was asked. This is a running theme in Robin's arc. Her personal desires, what she wants to do, are constantly at odds with the gender-binary domestic expectations of her.
Are you a hunter or a housemaid?
A skilled archer, athletic, smart, yet she wastes away in the scullery scrubbing floors. We immediately recognise that she yearns for adventure beyond the city walls, but is shackled by the life that has been laid out for her as a young girl.
This is still new for you, but it's a righteous life for a young lady.
Well, it's no life for me.
But for me, it's Maeve who steals the show. Robin plays the straight man to Maeve's reckless, rebellious tendencies, and she's just immediately lovable from the second she gets to introduce herself.
You should thank me. Why? I saved your life. Saved me? You bit me. Well, you kicked me in the gob enough times.
She's a perfect storm of bombast that makes her consistently entertaining to watch, helped to no end by Eva Whittaker's absolutely flawless vocal performance.
You stink. I knew you were here. Come out of your hidey-hole.
She's belligerent, has absolutely no regard for personal space, and she just likes to f*** with people. I respect that. She comes across as fierce and independent at first, but soon enough those layers start to peel away to reveal a little girl who's lonely and scared and a bit lost. She's honestly a character that's pretty hard not to like. She and Robin form the emotional core of the movie, and they play off of one another in cute and funny and heartwarming ways. But it's hard to talk about the characters without talking about the animation and the style, because their personalities are coded into their movements and appearance. I love the scene when Robin and Maeve meet because so much of who they are just shines through how they move and conduct themselves physically.
Our two main characters, Robin and Maeve, had to seem very different. Robin would be a lot more subtle in her movements, a little bit more dainty, and Maeve is a little bit more broad.
Maeve is all up in Robin's business, and Robin is all passive by comparison. Maeve is a cluster of large, punchy movements, while Robin is sharper and more civil. Details like Maeve shuddering in frustration and then calming herself, or this little eye gesture she gives to the wolves, it's so nuanced and charming and makes them such a delight to watch. My favourite example is how the animators naturally included animalistic actions into Maeve's mannerisms, like this bit where her mouth movements during dialogue are like little chompies. And the designs themselves are so specific. Cartoon Saloon have always been good at this. Their storybook aesthetic leans on simple shapes to communicate characters' personalities quickly and cleanly. We talked about this in the Wondersong video, but this kind of design approach applies to every aspect of Wolfwalkers' art direction. For example, the colonial city and its soldiers boast severe, rectangular shapes that make them appear permanently rigid and harsh. But Maeve is just peak character design. She's nothing but curves, big round shapes that soften her appearance and make her seem friendly and approachable. But I'm a particularly big fan of characters who are just like 75% hair. It's a great way of communicating that they're kind of wild or free-spirited or feral because they haven't had a haircut in a ridiculous amount of time and they've just got random stuff in their hair constantly. In Maeve's case, her hair gives her movement this smooth, flowy motion that translates her wild and frantic behaviour particularly well to the screen. It's just fantastic. We'll come back to the art direction a little later when we talk about the themes of the movie and how they're communicated, but for a moment I do just want to gush about how f***ing good this film looks. I mean, seriously, just holy shit. I keep using the term storybook aesthetic without qualifying what that means specifically, but the deliberately flat composition and shapes exaggerate the movie's two-dimensional appearance to the point that it looks like it's on a page. It so perfectly complements the folkloric, rustic roots of the story, and further helps Cartoon Saloon's film stand out in a saturated market. And while other films struggle to reconcile how dimensions would work in such an aesthetic, the big brains at Cartoon Saloon run into no such issue. When you make an image appear flat, that kind of aesthetic presents certain issues in terms of how they imagine space in 3 dimensions. The movie-loving Vincent, while ambitious, attempts to render its spaces in Van Gogh's iconic style, but ultimately struggles with implementing its rotoscoped characters into the setting's warped perspectives, leaving them feeling disconnected from the spaces, sticking out. But Cartoon Saloon works around these issues with artisanal accuracy. For example, watch how these wolves transition through various depths of field by slipping and sliding in and out of the two-dimensional panels that lead into the distance. And this kind of detail applies to every level of the movie's visuals. For example, for some of the more complex perspective shots, they rendered them in 3D and transferred them to paper by hand. Not by tracing or rotoscoping, by hand, using graphite to mimic the era-appropriate art of the 17th century. The sheer amount of love and effort and passion that went into making this movie look as incredible as it does is astonishing. I've linked a video in the description which explains how it was pulled off in more detail, and I highly recommend that you check it out. The forest environments are so easy on the eyes, done up in watercolour with these bright autumnal hues. The composition is soft and serene, contrasting the blocky, grey, visually overstimulating scenes in the city. This makes it so that whenever you're in the city, it feels stifling and bleak, and like Robin, you just want to escape to the world beyond the walls. Now, I feel at this point we can't really go much further without talking about the central themes of the film because they permeate every aspect of the production. In fact, writing this script has been a little challenging because everything great about it is connected by theme, which makes talking about individual aspects of the movie in isolation rather difficult. What I personally find most interesting is what the movie has to say about colonialism. It takes place during a crucial point in Irish history when the English, led by this chuff, and we'll get to you, reconquered Ireland beginning in 1649. Wait, when is this movie set? Oh yeah, 1650. So the wounds are pretty fresh. The English flag looms over the walls of Kilkenny with the same ominous energy as the swastikas of World War II Paris. So I've been remiss to name the villain of the movie. In the film itself, he's referred to simply as Lord Protector, and it wasn't until I was perusing the wiki that I realised it's actually Oliver Ruddy Cromwell. Seeing how he looks just like Oliver Cromwell, I felt like somewhat of a loser for not noticing this earlier. If you don't know, Oliver Cromwell is a real figure in British history and is also really bad news. Cromwell, or as I like to call him Ollie McWarcrimes, was a Puritan weirdo and an important colonial figure who'd done more than his fair share of massacres in his time. I won't go into too much detail here, but during his conquest of Ireland, his actions in Drogheda and Wexford are considered particularly brutal, the latter seeing the slaughter of 1,500 civilians. I'd encourage you to do a little googling yourself. So Cartoon Saloon woke up one morning and chose violence, making this ruthless figure of Irish colonial history the central villain of a kids' film. This is a bold move to say the least. And to be clear, the history of Ireland has a pretty intimate relationship with colonialism, and it plays into the symbolism and story of Wolfwalkers in several major ways. Before the English in 1649, the Normans invaded Ireland in the 12th century, turning Kilkenny into a merchant town and building the Kilkenny Castle, which is an ominous set piece and major location in the film, almost a symbol of colonial oppression in itself. The Wolfwalkers represent the indigenous people of Ireland due to their roots in Irish mythological heritage, which I'll talk about in a moment. More specifically, they represent those who have not been subsumed into the colonial regime.
Tomorrow I will show them I have tamed you, just as I will tame this land.
And those who cannot be controlled must be culled.
Put an end to that wild beast. What cannot be tamed must be destroyed.
Werewolves and lycanthropes are relatively prolific in Irish mythology, with the Art of Wolfwalkers book particularly underscoring the man-wolves of Ossory, an ancient Irish people who could, in some accounts, willingly transform into wolves while their bodies slept, just as the Wolfwalkers do in the movie. Before Kilkenny was called Kilkenny, it was simply part of the medieval Ossory kingdom, it and its inhabitants predating any Norman or English conquest. When I started talking about the film's art direction, I talked about how Kilkenny and its townsfolk are drawn in blocky, rigid shapes, while the forest and its inhabitants are all soft curves. But this is as much an aesthetic choice as a thematic one, visually depicting the dichotomy between those within the colonial regime, rigid and stifled, and those without, flowing and free. But above all else, the most impactful and effective visual cue to these themes is the use of line work, which is nothing short of a stroke of genius. Dividing the settings not just by brickwork, the blocky urban space and its sharp inhabitants are seemingly drawn with a ruler, while Maeve, her family of wolves, and the forest wear smooth arcing outlines, and artifacts of the animator's sketches are even left in. That is to say, while the city and its inhabitants are contained within solid lines, the forest and the Wolfwalkers are rendered with loose, sketchy linework that cannot be contained, no more so than they can be contained within the colonial framework. The choice to leave the structural lines in also gives them a free-form, loose feel. Robin is the outlier here because she acts as a sort of mid-ground between these two disparate worlds. I think it's appropriate that she's designed with neither the rigid lines of the colonizers or the purely spherical leanings of the Wolfwalkers, but sort of both. She's certainly angular, but her head shape is framed by a stout rectangle with curved edges, and her line work evolves between the rigid lines and free-flowing sketchy lines over the course of the story. As co-director Ross Stewart would have it, her shape language and visual language goes on the same journey as her character. But as for narrative and plot, so much of it revolves around communication and certain people being completely unwilling to listen to other ways of living or even see other perspectives as valid. This primarily goes for the colonizers and the colonized, who will frequently dismiss the Wolfwalkers as nonsensical or even subhuman.
Never speak of such pagan nonsense in this town.
And to that end, lycanthropy works both as a fun, folkloric baseline for a story, but also as a handy plot device. Because it can be transferred by bite, it can put certain characters in specific positions where they have to see the other perspective whether they want to or not. There's a great quote from co-director Ross Stewart talking about Robin's first experience as a Wolfwalker through the unique wolf vision scenes. Wolf vision footage only makes up about 3 minutes, but it adds so much to Robin's story. She couldn't go back to her normal, flat life once she's experienced the true instinctive life of a wolf. Wolf vision is really successful at portraying that. It's a completely different world. And there's a certain amount of give and take there. While the movie never goes so far as to sympathise with the colonizers, it does do an excellent job of demonstrating how even the most well-intentioned people, like Robin's father Bill, can be manipulated into conforming to or enabling a harmful colonial regime. In terms of narrative and theme, Wolfwalkers is most comparable to Hayao Miyazaki's magnum opus, Princess Mononoke, and believe me, I do not make that comparison lightly. Like Princess Mononoke, ideas of imperialism, colonization, and expansionism go hand in hand with environmentalism. Like Ashitaka in Princess Mononoke, Robin is torn between the quote-unquote civilized world and the natural one. In Tomm Moore's own words, the main theme of the story is trying to find the balance that we need between nature and wilderness, order and stability, rules and structure. These kinds of themes have been pertinent to Moore since the early days of the studio, reaching as far back as the creative seed that would become Song of the Sea, a story which came to Moore after seeing the corpses of seals washed up on the western shores of Ireland. According to a Q&A Tomm Moore did with The Hollywood Reporter, Robin is the kind of strong, activist, outspoken young person that we're inspired by. Think of Greta Thunberg or somebody like that. She's the kind of powerful young woman that the world needs at the moment and that we're all going to turn to as the years go on. And of course, the narrative and visual cues, like the blocky versus freeform line work, translate as much to the environmental themes they do to the colonial one. There are those who simply want to consume, regardless of the effect it has on the environment around them, and those who want humanity and nature to live in some semblance of harmony. Robin, like Ashitaka, stands somewhere between the human expansionists and the forest-dwelling Wolfwalkers, a bridge between the two disparate worlds. At the end of the day, everything about Wolfwalkers, from its dense thematic core to its plot and visuals, are tied together with expert craftsmanship and in a way that's incredibly easy for anyone to digest, regardless of age.
We very quickly hit upon the idea that we wanted to tell this story about people on completely opposite sides being able to see each other's point of view, and it's only become more and more relevant over the years. And those themes, as I said, just became stronger. You know, environmentalism, empathy, polarization between people, and how kids can sometimes see past that. And so I just hope that that balance, whether it's between different warring human tribes or our attitude towards other animals and species, I hope that there's some kind of inspiration that maybe we can come together to heal it rather than keep on dividing ourselves.
If you've made it this far into the video and you're still not convinced, then honestly, I'm not sure what else I can say that'll sell you on this film. I can talk about the depth and the themes of this movie until I'm blue in the face, but at the end of the day, it has all the necessary ingredients to just be an incredibly accessible, entertaining, emotional film that I really think would connect with more audiences if only more people were watching it and talking about it. The characters are endearing and easy to invest in, the visuals are stunning and unique, all the dramatic beats hit like a truck, it's everything it needs to be and more. As of making this video, there aren't a ton of ways you can watch this movie, which is no doubt a contributor to its underrated status. You can stream it on Apple TV, sign up for a free trial and watch it that way, but if you're like me and you'd rather have a physical copy, I highly recommend investing in the Irish Folklore Trilogy box set. This video isn't sponsored, but I do really want to point out how beautiful the box set is. Comes with these little art cards and a poster and a booklet with concept art and information and stuff and a whole bunch of other special features. It's beautiful and it has my seal of approval. I just want people to buy it and give Cartoon Saloon loads of money so they can keep making masterpieces like these. Lord knows the world needs them. I need them. Give me more Cartoon Saloon, inject it into my eyes! But even though this video is about Wolfwalkers, I think it's really worthwhile watching the Irish Folklore trilogy in order of release. Each movie tops the last in my opinion, giving this clear trajectory of the studio's development, but also, they're each a unique experience in their own way. While I can confidently say that Wolfwalkers is my favourite, the experience of watching it is fundamentally very different to that of Kells or Song of the Sea, making them all worthwhile viewing in their own right. And while The Breadwinner isn't as relevant to this video, it's an absolute masterpiece that really warrants a watch. Possibility for a future video maybe. So what's next for Cartoon Saloon? We now know that they're slated to produce a film called My Father's Dragon based on the book of the same name, and it will be released as a Netflix original film. This is great news because Netflix has a much larger customer base than Apple TV and could result in the studio garnering more attention. According to Cartoon Saloon's Facebook page, the plot and summary of My Father's Dragon is as follows. My Father's Dragon tells the story of young runaway Elmer Elevator, who searches for a captive dragon on Wild Island and finds much more than he could ever have anticipated. From the sounds of things, it fits nicely within Cartoon Saloon's wheelhouse, and I for one couldn't be more excited. It'll be directed by Nora Twomey, who also directed The Breadwinner, so we're going to be in capable hands. Who knows, maybe I'll even make a video about it. But until that point, thank you so much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. And as always, I'll see you all in the next video.